Okay, tonight I'm going to do another video on Orbiter 2010, and this time I'm going to use the XR2 Ravenstar, and I'm going to use the scenario entitled Landed at Brighton Beach. So I'm going to go ahead and click Launch Orbiter. This video is going to be a video of going from the moon back to the Earth. It's going to be fairly similar to the very last video that I did where I was using TransX. The main difference in this video is that I'm going to show...
Welcome aboard, Commander. All systems nominal.
I'm going to try to show how to get back to the Earth so that you will arrive at a specific point around the planet so that you can do your deorbit and re-entry burn right away. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on using TransX and setting it up, because I went through that in the last video and I went through that in a lot of detail. So for this part, I'm just going to go through this part fairly quickly. So we'll just do what we did before. I've got the external MFD to make this nice and large so you can see what it is that I'm looking at. So I'll select TransX, and again I'm going to go through this quickly, so if you don't know how to use TransX, then refer to the other video. So I'll click Escape here for the planets, moons, go forward, go to View to change over to the eject plan, bring down the negative prograde velocity to the desired amount. You can see here the yellow dashed line is getting in close to the blue, but it's not quite where I need it, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that down a bit more. And I'm just eyeballing this as I explained in the other video, and I'm going to say that looks good right there. So that part of TransX is set up. Now what I want to do, and I suppose I can use an external MFD for this as well, just to make this nice and large to see. I'm going to bring up Map MFD, and I'm going to reference the Earth, and actually I need to make this a little smaller because the reference box is always behind. So I'm going to select Earth, and for this part now I need to click Target, and my target base is going to be Wideawake International, and I also need to click Target and select the moon. And what this does is it shows me where the moon is at in relation to the target base. Just do a little maintenance here, click DSB, change the orbit lines over to orbit plane. Now what I'm trying to figure out here is the right time to leave the moon, because as you know, when you deorbit and re-enter, you basically want to be halfway around the planet when you do the deorbit burn. So if Wideawake International is here, halfway around the planet would be something like over here. So I want to get back to Earth when I'm roughly, somewhere in this position. That way, I can do the deorbit burn, and I can plan on coming in and landing here at Wideawake. So the question becomes, how do I time it so that I will arrive here as opposed to arriving here or here or here or anywhere else? And the answer is there's really no good way that I know of to do this just using Map MFD and TransX. The only way I've been able to do this is just through a bit of trial and error. It's not real satisfying, it's not real scientific, but it does work. And what I found using this particular scenario, and based on the distance of the moon from the Earth, is that when I want to accelerate time here so that the base is about 2 squares to the left of the moon. So basically, let me slow this down here. So basically you can see the moon coming across here, And when the moon is about right in this position, that's about the time where I want to leave the moon. So let me fast forward this a little bit further. Take a look at that. That's 1 square, 2 squares. So basically, right about in this position. If I leave the moon, now, or an hour from now, which will be about how long it takes me to get up off the landing pad and get into orbit around the moon, then by the time I get back to the Earth will have rotated, several times, because it takes several days to get from the moon back to the Earth. And by the time I get back, I should be arriving, somewhere about in this position. And then that'll be roughly halfway around the Earth. And that'll give me, time to do the deceleration burn and then deorbit and re-enter. So let's give that a shot. Let's try this. So I've got this how I need it. So I'm going to go ahead and close out map MFD. And let me bring up TransX one more time. Since I did accelerate time after setting TransX up, let me just take a quick peek at my plan. And that still looks pretty good. Just go back here for a moment. Something I do need to do though is go through the variables, and I need to reset this date. There we go. Because when I turn maneuver mode, or rather when I come into TransX, the date that's used is the date when I first come into TransX. And since I accelerated time, the date had gone forward, so I just needed to reset the time real quick. So I've got that part set up. And again, if that part's confusing, just refer to the previous video on TransX. Now I'm going to go through and set up this part of TransX for getting back, or for getting up off the lunar landing pad and getting in orbit. So just need to go through the variables here as before, change the graph projection over to plan, and change over to escape plan at this point. Bring the PE distance down. I'll do that the same way I did last time, to 1.768. And I need to come over to the eject orientation, and we'll get that green line out to the surface, and then we'll get the white line overlaying, which it looks like it's pretty good right there. And that's going to give me a heading of 60 degrees as I get up off the lunar pad and head out. So I'll bring up orbit MFD, change the projection to the ship. We'll leave the distance set this way for now. Change the frame over to the equatorial frame. And I'm ready to go. So let me just do a little bit of housekeeping here. I notice I've still got a little bit of scram fuel in the tank, and that's a waste. I can't use it, and it's just extra mass that I don't need. So I'm going to turn on the APU, and I'm going to dump that scram fuel because I don't need it.
Warning, fuel dump.
I'm also going to dump some of this LOX.
Scram fuel low. Warning, scram fuel depleted.
I'm also going to dump some of this liquid oxygen because I don't need 13 days worth to get back to back to the Earth and land. And carrying all that extra mass is just inefficient.
Warning, LOX dump.
So I've called the maintenance guys over here at Brighton Beach, and they're taking some of this liquid oxygen and putting it in their fuel storage for somebody else to use. I don't like the idea of thinking that I'm just dumping it out on the ground. So we got 10 days.
Warning, LOX dump.
I could dump a little bit more than that, but just in the interest of time, we'll go with that amount. I could also get rid of a little bit of main RCS and APU, but I'll go ahead and keep what I've got there. So we've got hover doors open, APU running. Okay. Now the heading I need is about 60 degrees. So let's hover up off the pad here.
Wheels up.
peek. Looks good.
Gear up.
Rotate, this will go this way.
Gear up and locked.
Oops, gonna overshoot. And right about there. Pitch up a little bit. Turn off the hover engines. Close the hover doors. Keeping an eye on the relative inclination. And we'll get into orbit here shortly. Okay, now that the relative inclination is going up a little bit, I'm going to use control thrusters there a little bit just to keep that relative inclination from climbing too much. I have to keep it good and low. We're pitched up a lot more than we need to be there. Trying to keep that relative inclination low just by using a little bit of lateral translation back and forth. Looks like I'm pretty well centered right now, so I don't really need to worry about that too much now.
Information. APU running.
I'm watching my APR over here. I want that to be right about there. Okay. I can turn off the APU for now. Switch over to the orbit HUD. And a couple things to do as before. Need to circularize my orbit when I get over here to apoapsis. But I also need to see if I can get any more on the plane alignment with the relative inclination, see if I can get that lower. So I'm going to bring up the align plane, click ELS, punch in the inclination, 49.6, space 0.7657. That'll tell me what kind of adjustments I need to make here and when I need to make those. That's 1,900 seconds away, so I don't have to worry about that for now. Come back to the orbit MFD, come around here to apoapsis. Coming up on apoapsis in about 3 minutes. Go to prograde. And again, if I'm going through this quickly, it's only because I've already done all this in another video, and I'm only trying to, in this video, the only thing I mainly want to point out is how to get back to Earth and arrive at a specific point. So all this stuff is just repetition. Okay, now we're going to circularize the orbit. And there we go, that's circular. Now I'll switch back over to the align plane MFD, and we can see that's coming up here in 1,000 seconds, and it's going to be a very small amount of plane alignment. So we'll accelerate time to get to that point. And what I'm going to do here, since it's such a small amount, I'm not going to bother going to the orbit normal position. I'm just going to go ahead and stay prograde, and I'll use translation thrusters to get this last little bit of plane adjustment. Once I get right up here to that point, I'll turn off Prograde Autopilot, but I'm still oriented in this position. And as soon as this is down to about 1, I just need to tap a little bit of 2 to give myself a little bit of lateral, and I'm on rotation.
Translation. Rotation. Translation.
There we go. And that'll just save me the trouble of orienting to the normal position and then reorienting to prograde. If it was a more significant amount of relative inclination, then I would have used either orbit normal or orbit anti-normal. So that part's done. Next thing to do, come around here to the ejection point and do our burn for heading off to Earth. So we're here, we've got to go all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and accelerate time to get to that point. Coming up here, don't want to overshoot. Going to begin the burn in 500 seconds. Go ahead and go prograde here. Just watching the begin burn. About 100 seconds away. Okay. Go ahead and hit prograde. Bring up the orbit MFD, even though I don't really need it at this point, but can begin burn in a few more seconds. Here we go. And burning. Go ahead and hit T 1 time just to get through this burn quickly. Okay. Watching the delta V. 60, 50, 40, 30. 20 backing off now. Okay.
Rotation. Translation.
Switch over to translation to get that last little bit. Pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the prograde now and work on the semi-major difference by using the lateral. And I left a little bit of delta V on purpose because as I use the lateral to fix that semi-major difference, it will bring down the delta V a little bit more. So you can see that semi-major difference, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, coming down. Now it's starting to go back up, so I'll hit a little bit of lateral in the other direction to bring that. That's about as low as it's going to get right there at 0.0054. So now I'm going to tap a little bit of Control 6 to bring that delta V as close to 0 as I can get it. And I'd say right about there is as low as it's going to get. So now I'm all set for going back to the Earth. So far this has all been basically the same as the other flight, with the main difference just being, we're trying to time the departure from the moon so that we arrive back at the Earth at a specific time. So now I'm going to reference the Earth, and the reason I'm doing that is so that I can keep an eye on this gravity meter. And I know that I just want to go all the way until I'm basically at 0.80. So I'm just going to hit T a few times, and I'm going to get all the way out to Earth. And we're getting quite close now to that 0.8. Okay, this is where I like to be to determine how much inward or outward burn I need to do for getting the altitude that I want at Earth. So let's hit the distance readout to change the distance readout from the planocentric over to above the surface, and this says that I'm going to be coming back with an altitude of 480 kilometers above the surface. That's quite a bit higher than I need it to be, and as I explained in the last video, by the time you get in this close to the Earth, this figure is pretty accurate. It's off by a little bit, but it's pretty close. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up TransX to do this inward burn, even though I don't need to. As I explained before, you can just rotate inward and do the burn to bring the periapsis down to what you want. But we'll go ahead and use TransX. So I'll click View to over to Maneuver, turn Maneuver Mode on, and this is going to be an outward burn, but it's going to be negative outward, also known as inward. And what we're looking at here, as I explained in the last video, this is the distance 6.371 from the center of the Earth out to the surface. If I add 200 to this figure, that gives me 6.571, and that would mean that my target altitude would be 200 kilometers above the surface. So this would be, for the hypothetical PED, if I made this 6.571, that would mean that I would want my target altitude to be 200 kilometers above the surface. I actually don't want it to be quite that high, since I'm planning on landing right away. So I'm going to go with 6.4. Let's see. Got to think about this for a second. See, 6.471 would be 100 kilometers. Need to be higher than that, so I'm going to go with 6.5. Or rather 6 point. Let me think about this for a second. $6.531. I believe that would be 160 kilometers, and that's pretty good for landing right away, so we'll go with that. Click over to View to bring up the target view.
Rotation.
Make sure I'm in the proper RCS mode this time. And rotate inward. Getting that green X lined up. It's pretty good right there. A little bit of Control Plus to bring that delta V down to 0, and you can see the PEA over there in the orbit MFD.
Translation.
And that's got it about right there. Click View a couple times to get over to View Maneuver. Go through the variables and turn maneuver mode off. Now we'll go ahead and warp time ahead till we're at 0.95. And we'll go with that. Hit prograde to get a look at the Earth. See how everything's coming along. Now the distance between 0.80 and 0.95 brought our periapsis up to 171. That's okay, but I think I will,
Rotation.
with the translation thrusters, go ahead and bring that down to about 165. It'll change just a little bit more between now and the time we actually get to periapsis, but that'll be pretty close. We're now about 12,800 seconds away from periapsis, so let's just kind of slowly move on in. Accelerate time here a little bit. And about here is good. We'll go ahead and use TransX again to set up this deceleration burn. It's not really necessary because I do know quite well how to decelerate, but just to show how this part works again, turn maneuver mode on, go through the variables, and we'll go to the date before we do anything else, and we'll go down to a alter setting, and according to TransX, and this is correct, we're going to arrive at periapsis at 51990.2929. So that's when I want to do the burn. So I'm going to move the date ahead until it matches that number. Okay, there we go. That's when we're going to do the burn. Now we need to determine how much burn we're going to do. It's going to be a negative prograde velocity burn. And as I explained in the last video, we just start by doing a lot of negative prograde, and I just keep clicking this until I start to see this hypothetical PED come down. There it just jumps, and now I'm going to adjust, and I'm going to go back up the other direction until it stops climbing. Okay, there it's not climbing anymore. Now I'm going to go to a finer adjustment yet, and I'm going to go back the other direction, and I'm going to keep clicking negative until I start to see it come down. Okay, there it came down. Now I'm going to just do it one more time, go with the adjustment to an even finer setting yet, and I'm just going to add in a little bit more until I see this number jump up. There it came up, and then one last time down to the alter setting and minus until it says 6.535, and then at that point I know I've got just enough negative prograde velocity. There we go. So that's set up. I can click VW to bring up the target view, and I don't need to do the burn for another 7,000 seconds, so I can warp time ahead until I get to that point. But I do got to be careful because, as I mentioned in my last video, when I get in close to the Earth and it starts rendering textures, my computer will hesitate a little bit, especially when I'm doing these screen recordings. Okay, that's as close as I want to get because my computer will hesitate if I'm not careful. So I'm going to go to the retrograde position, and got a little bit of time here. A couple things I want to look at. I can bring up base sync MFD, and my target base is going to be Wideawake International, and just a little bit of maintenance things that I do here. ED, click ED to bring this over to direct. This is already set to closest passage, which is what I want. I like to click mod to turn off that graphic because it just gets in the way and I don't need it. And since I'm landing right away, I only need this to be set on one orbit. I can see the distance to the base is off by quite a bit, but this is going to change as I do the deceleration burn, so I'm not going to worry about the distance to the base until after the deceleration burn's done. But I like to have this up for now, just so I can see it. But we'll go ahead and let me open Orbit MFD up and an external MFD just so I can have that open also. Okay, that's all set how I need. Go ahead and hit T a couple times to get closer to the point of the burn.
Rotation.
Okay, when I get in this close to the burn, I'm going to turn retrograde off, and I'm going to line up the green X. There we go. And burning. reference the Earth. Target. Wideawake. And you can see we're about halfway around. Distance to the base is 18.37, and it's actually going up a little bit. So we're slightly more than halfway around. But that's good because that gives us time to do the deceleration burn. So basically all I'm keeping an eye on at the moment is the green X over here. I want to make sure that it stays reasonably lined up. Keeping an eye on the periapsis, I want to make sure that it doesn't start to drastically change, which will happen if you get too far off center here. And other than that, I'm just keeping an eye on the amount of delta V that I need to burn down, keeping an eye on the apoapsis, making sure that it's getting down to a nice circular orbit. I'll make any changes that I need to make while this burn is proceeding. And the only thing we didn't take into account on this flight was getting the distance to the base lined up as part of the mid-course correction between the moon and the Earth. That's something I'm going to do at a later date. So we're keeping an eye on apoapsis. It's really getting pretty low here, and the amount of delta V left is getting pretty low, so we got to pay attention to make sure we don't blow up or mess up our burn here. We'll go with that. Got a little bit of maintenance to do here on this burn because it's not quite perfect, so we can rotate outward a little bit. And the reason we want to rotate outward is because you'll notice our periapsis is a positive number. We haven't got around to it yet. So by rotating outward this way a little bit and then doing a little bit of a burn, we can actually continue to circularize our orbit even before we actually get the rest of the way out to periapsis. It's not quite out enough, so I'll go out a little bit more by just another 10 degrees, and there we go. You can see our PEA is actually going up a little bit, and our APA is actually going down a little bit. Now that the more circular it gets, the more you have to rotate outward. But I'm not worried about getting it perfect. I just want to get it a little closer there. That's getting really close right now. That's only a difference of 6 kilometers, so we'll go with that. Okay, so we are basically halfway around the planet. You can see here we're 18.23, that's 18,000 kilometers away from the base. So the next thing to do is we need to get lined up with the base, and we'll do that just by fast forwarding to the point where the time to node is 0, and we can do any base alignment that we need to do. Something else I'm going to want. I'm also done with TransX, by the way. So I can click view a couple of times, come over to maneuver, turn maneuver mode off, and we're done with that. So I can also bring up aero brake MFD now. Target, Wideawake, International. Switch over to this view. That's just by pressing PG then PRJ. That brings up this view. And again, I'm going to click mod to turn off that extra information because I don't need it. Just trying to determine here. I am 1,200 seconds away from being able to do a base alignment. And I'm about 2,500 seconds away, or 2,500 seconds away from actually getting to the base. That's cutting it pretty close. It's okay, it'll still work. So what I need to do now, this number here, the TN, time to node, go ahead and warp ahead till I get closer to that point. And I think we can probably safely go with that. And this line here, plane change or PLC, tells me which direction I need to orient. It shows the plus sign, so I can just click orbit normal plus, wait for the vessel to settle, and now I can burn the main engines to bring that base alignment down to 0 or close to 0. And you can see what impact that has by looking here at aero brake. You'll see this green line start to straighten out and get closer to the base. Distance to the base is 1,000 kilometers in closing, and we're still 10,000, almost 11,000 kilometers away, so we've still got time to do all this. And the distance to the base doesn't need to be perfectly 0. In fact, it'll never be perfectly 0, but you do want it to get it fairly close. When we do the deorbit burn here in a moment, it's going to have some impact on our distance to the base, but it should be fairly small. Okay, we're almost down to 0 here with the distance to the base, getting really close. And as soon as that's done, we're going to transition immediately into the deorbit burn. And we're just going to go with that, because getting it all the way down to 0 is pointless, because as soon as we do the deorbit burn, it's going to change anyway. So we'll go to the retrograde position here. And now we're just going to do a main engine burn until aero brake shows that we're going to be hitting basically on the base. And some people may not like to land this way because this will give us a lot of plasma. If you really want to be really careful about landing, you can spend a good hour, or actually probably closer to 2 hours, orbiting the Earth a couple of times and come down through the atmosphere really slow. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to hot rod my way down. And you can see that green line there at aero brake. It's really starting to close in on the base. See right there? That's really close. Okay, we're going to go with that. So now, excuse me, I'm going to set up my plan for my angle of attack for coming down through the atmosphere. And so I press 2 on, this is using the XR2, and I switch from pitch to angle of attack, and I'm going to plan that my angle of attack is probably going to be about 45 degrees. But before I do that, I'm going to get rid of some mass, because I'm still pretty heavy. I think I'm done with that. I'm going to land in just a few minutes, So I don't need 4 days worth of oxygen.
Warning, LOX dump.
So let's get rid of some O2.
Warning, LOX dump.
Get rid of
Warning,
some RCS.
LOX dump.
And get rid of some APU.
Warning, LOX dump. Information. Warning, LOX dump. 80%. Information. LOX dump. Warning, oxygen low. System warning, information. Dump. APU
We'll go with 21 hours, even though we only need about...
Warning, fuel dump.
This is good enough. We could probably even dump all of the main fuel, but we'll keep a little bit in there just in case we botch our landing and have to go around or something. So the next point that I'm looking for is the entry interface, and that's about 120 kilometers above the surface. So I can go ahead and fast forward here a little bit till I get closer to that point.
Information 50%. APU running.
Turn off the APU. Coming up on entry interface. I'll get a little bit closer in just for the sake of time. That's pretty good there.
Mach 26.
Just trying to get the vessel oriented.
Translation.
According to Wideawake, we are pretty close to on target, and I can take care of this last little bit of incorrection just by changing the angle of attack ever so slightly. You can see this has me coming in a little short, so just by lowering the angle of attack a little bit, that'll get me on target.
Center of gravity shift online.
So we're at 90 kilometers above the surface and coming in. Here in a moment I'm going to close the radiator because the dynamic pressure will start increasing and cause a hull breach if I don't close that. And we'll close it now. That's Alt R is the shortcut. And I need to grab my joystick because I don't land well without it. And let me just make sure that joystick is activated. That's left. Oops, did not mean to do that. Okay. Let me check the aero brake. Okay, yep, it's working. So for the next few minutes, all I can really do is just wait for the vessel to come down through the atmosphere. When you get into atmospheric flight, you really can't do a lot of time acceleration. It just causes a lot of problems if you do. You can also
26.
kind of keep an eye on my base alignment here. I can see I'm coming in a little bit south of the island. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of left bank because I do want to come in more on the northern side of the island because the alignment of the runway is 120 degrees. So that's kind of a coming out of the northeast and heading a little bit south, or rather coming out of the northwest, heading a little bit southeast. So I want to come in a little bit on the north side of the island. Go with a little more bank than that. See what effect that has over here in aero brake. And it looks like I'm still a little short. So I'm going to bring down the
25.
Angle of attack down a little more. That looks good right there. In fact, that's a little much. And I can do a little bit of time acceleration until I get down a little further, but I don't want to do much because it really has a lot of trouble
Mach 24.
when you're in the atmosphere. Once I drop down below about 60 kilometers, I should start getting some re-entry plasma shortly thereafter.
Mach 23.
Hopefully I can actually stick this landing. I usually do pretty well, but every now and then I blow it. But nevertheless, the idea
Mach 22.
of this video is just to show how to plan, going from the moon back to the Earth and actually landing at a specific point as soon as you get back, as opposed to getting into a parking orbit
Mach 21.
and having to go around several orbits. You can see in this video we came back and we just decelerated, deorbited, and now we're landing right away. Okay, so we should be getting, we're heating up now. Yep, we got our plasma. And again, some people don't like to re-enter this way. They prefer to come in where they've got a really slow descent down through the upper atmosphere, so that they don't get any flames. And that's probably fine. That's a safe way to do it. But it takes a really, really long time to land that way.
Mach
I mean, I
19.
think it takes close to 90 minutes just to get through the atmosphere if you do that. Whereas with this method, you punch down through really quickly. It's a little dangerous in the sense that we're getting pretty hot. But I've done this many
Mach
times.
18.
I've redlined the XR many times, and it doesn't even look like I'm gonna redline it this time. I do need to bring my AOA down a little bit because I'm coming up short.
Mach 17.
A little more. Looks like that should be good. Probably put in a little more bank. Check the external camera. It's a hot ride down through the atmosphere. But it looks cool.
Mach 15.
Looks like peak heating's passed. We're actually cooling down, so I think we're fine. Still got about 500 kilometers to go.
Mach 14.
Switch over to the surface HUD now. There we go. And we're pretty well done with base alignment, so now I'm going to switch over to glide slope MFD.
Mach 13.
This is a big help for me for lining up with the runway. And so we want Wideawake International 12. And we want this just helps me decide how much bank
Mach
I need.
12.
You can see here it's a little bit off to the right, so I'm going to put in a little bit more bank. That should help me line up there a little better. Oops, wrong button. I'm going to switch the unit measurement
Mach
over to kilometers.
11.
Go with a little more bank yet.
Mach 10.
235 kilometers from the base. Actually, should have it in view shortly. Peak heating is obviously past, and we don't have nearly as much flame as we did. There's the island right there. According to glide slope, we're lined up really well. So as long as I don't do something really stupid, it should be a good landing.
Mach 8.
But don't discount the possibility of me doing something really stupid. Happens all the time.
Mach 7.
Once I get down to around
Mach 6.
600 or so meters a second, then I can turn off all the autopilots and take control. get rid of some of this bank now.
Mach 5.
Probably go ahead and zero it out.
Mach 4.
Go ahead and turn on surface
On.
controls.
Off.
Turn off RCS mode.
Mach
And
3.
be taking over control here in just a moment. 700. Take a quick look at the outside just for the fun of it. Okay, we can handle it from here. Go ahead and turn off the autopilot.
Mach 2.
And the first thing I got to do is change the trim, the elevator trim, because with the autopilot on, it tends to set the elevator trim really high. Pitch down. Get turned in a little bit. We need more than that. Feeling pretty confident about this landing. At any rate, we made it to the island quite well. Should have seen my first few attempts at deorbit and re-entry. It was awful. I was off by thousands of kilometers. And this could have been better. I banked too long. So now I'm having to rotate, or rather bank pretty hard to the right there.
5,000. 4,000. Information. APU
Subsonic.
fuel 40%. 3,000. 2,000. You are cleared to land. 1,000, 900, 800, 700, 600, 500, 400, 300. Warning, gear is up. 200. Gear down. Warning, gear is up.
100,
75, 50. Gear down and locked. 30, 20, 10, 6, 3, 1. Wheels down.
I'll take it. Could have been a little more straight with the runway, but
100 knots.
fairly soft touchdown. If we look over here at the there we got wheel stop. If we look over here at the display, it says that we touched down with well, that's hard to see, 1.193 meters a second. That's pretty good. With the vessel as light as it is, I believe our maximum touchdown in this vessel, yeah, it says with a light load, could have been 4.2 meters a second. So we came down quite light. Even with the full load, could have been 2.8 meters a second. So even if it was fully loaded, that landing still would have worked. So that's that. We made it from the moon, from the landing pad at Brighton Beach, all the way back to the Earth. Go ahead and open the cabin hatch here.
Using external O2.
Turn on
Hatch
external cooling.
open.
See here we have plenty of oxygen left, 21 hours, plenty of APU, plenty
External cooling
of RCS,
online.
plenty of main. Turn off the APU, get rid of some of that noise. Take a look here briefly at the landing. I always come up to the right of the line. That's so weird. Even when I make a conscious effort to try to come in on the center, or even a little bit to the left, I still always come in a little bit to the right. That's weird. Okay, so hopefully that was worth watching. Maybe you got some information out of it. In some other video that I do here, hopefully within the next few weeks, I want to show different ways from going from the moon back to the Earth, and eventually I want to repeat this flight and show how to get back to the Earth, and then also incorporate a base align burn as part of the mid-course correction while we're still out, away from the Earth, so that when we arrive back at the Earth, we can decelerate, deorbit, and land right away, and then we won't even have to do that base alignment burn that I did this time. But I just like to do these flights in a variety of ways so that you can practice all different sorts of ways of doing things. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Halfway around the planet would be something like over here. So I want to get back to Earth when I'm roughly, somewhere in this position. That way, I can do the deorbit burn, and I can plan on coming in and landing here at Wideawake. So the question becomes, how do I time it so that I will arrive here as opposed to arriving here or here or here or anywhere else? And the answer is, there's really no good way that I know of to do this just using map, MFD, and TransX. The only way I've been able to do this is just through a bit of trial and error. That's not real. It's not real satisfying. It's not real scientific, but it does work. And what I've found using this particular scenario, and based on the distance of the moon from the Earth, is that when I want to accelerate time here so that the base is about 2 squares to the left of the moon. So basically, let me slow this down here. So basically you can see the moon coming across here, and when the moon is about right in this position, that's about the time where I want to leave the moon. So let me fast forward this a little bit further. Take a look at that. That's 1 square, 2 squares. So basically right about in this position. If I leave the moon, now, or an hour from now, which will be about how long it takes me to get up off the landing pad and get into orbit around the moon, then by the time I get back to the Earth will have rotated, several times, because it takes several days to get from the moon back to the Earth. And by the time I get back, I should be arriving, somewhere about in this position. And then that'll be roughly halfway around the Earth, and that'll give me time to do the deceleration burn and then deorbit and re-enter. So let's give that a shot. Let's try this, and I'm going to reference the Earth, and actually I need to make this a little smaller because the reference box is always behind. So I'm going to select Earth, and for this part now I need to click target, and my target base is going to be Wideawake International, and I also need to click target and select the moon. And what this does is it shows me where the moon is at in relation to the target base. Let me just do a little maintenance here. Click DSB, change the orbit lines over to orbit plane. Now, what I'm trying to figure out here is the right time to leave the moon, because as you know, when you deorbit and re-enter, you basically want to be halfway around the planet when you do the deorbit burn. So if Wideawake International is here, okay, tonight I'm going to do another video on Orbiter 2010. And this time I'm going to use the XR2 Ravenstar, and I'm going to use the scenario entitled Landed at Brighton Beach. So I'm going to go ahead and click Launch Orbiter. This video is going to be a video of going from the moon back to the Earth. It's going to be fairly similar to the very last video that I did where I was using TransX. The main difference in this video is that I'm going to show...
Welcome aboard, Commander. All systems nominal.
I'm going to try to show how to get back to the Earth so that you will arrive at a specific point around the planet so that you can do your deorbit and re-entry burn right away. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on using TransX and setting it up because I went through that in the last video and I went through that in a lot of detail. So for this part, I'm just going to go through this part fairly quickly. So we'll just do what we did before. I've got the external MFD to make this nice and large so you can see what it is that I'm looking at. So I'll select TransX, and again I'm going to go through this quickly, so if you don't know how to use TransX, then refer to the other video. So I'll click escape here for the planets, moons, go forward, go to view to change over to the eject plan, bring down the negative prograde velocity to the desired amount. You can see here the yellow dashed line is getting in close to the blue, but it's not quite where I need it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that down a bit more. And I'm just eyeballing this as I explained in the other video. And I'm going to say that looks good right there. So that part of TransX is set up. Now what I want to do, and I suppose I can use an external MFD for this as well, just to make this nice and large to see. I'm going to bring up map MFD,